Congratulations, Karen.
What you made?
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. We are missing Rob Simpson and Don Radke. Anybody else?
Council President Hudson.
Council President Hudson. Okay. All right, everybody else good? All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. I will note that our proof of notice is on the second page of our board packet. I will also note that all board members are present with the exceptions of Council President Hudson, Rob Simpson, and Don Radke. And I will also take the opportunity to welcome Karen Schroeder to the board. Welcome, Karen. Thank you for your service. With that, we'll move to our minutes, which begin on the third page of the packet from our March 24th, 2025 meeting. I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting minutes are accepted. All right, next up, we'll go to new business, and it looks like we have a resolution on committees. So, Michelle, do you want to introduce that?
Sure, thanks, Mayor. So we were just looking to kind of take the opportunity now that Karen is sworn in, and as some of you may recall, Don Radke had officially joined the board after we had appointed our original committee configuration. So as we are getting to the point of beginning to convene committees on a more regular schedule, starting with the governance committee, we just wanted to kind of take the opportunity to make sure that we had some additions on there. So we are recommending that we would add both Karen and Don to the governance committee, and then add Don also to the audit and finance committees as well. I think part of the reason for adding Don onto all three is that he kind of, because of the configuration of the board and the dual status that some folks have with regards to their elected positions, Don is kind of the all-around utility player with regards to being an independent board member. At this point, Caitlin and Karen are respectfully would kind of meet those requirements as well, up until the point in a situation in which the organization might enter into a contract with either of your respective agencies. You meet it for now, but we thought that kind of it makes sense just from a continuity standpoint to add folks in this way. I think we're also open if there's folks that would prefer to come off for any reason. At this point, we're happy to do that as well, but this is kind of what we're putting forward to recommend for now.
Don's good with this?
Yes. So governance committee, I think the calendar date that Hannah had sent out was May 16th at 1:30, I believe. Yep. So that's the next one of those we're looking at.
For those interested in more information on the committees, including members, that's just the last couple pages in the packet.
What's the name of all the committees?
So we have the governance committee, the audit committee, and the finance committee.
Just an E in my last name.
I'm sorry about that.
It does matter.
It does. We will make sure that that gets corrected in the minutes, and I will learn how to spell better. Thank you.
Any other questions about the committee additions? And that's going to be contained in one resolution, Michelle?
I would defer to Connor. Is it preferable that they be 3 separate resolutions for each of the 3 committees? Yes. All right.
3 separate? Okay, so I will, we'll do them one at a time. So first, I'll entertain a motion to approve a resolution adding Karen and Don to the governance committee. Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Next, I will entertain a motion to add Don Radke to the audit committee.
So moved.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Last, I will entertain a motion to add Don Radke to the finance committee. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Mayor Walsh, I
Yes.
would also like to say for Madam President, I will, in her spot, be replacing her until she can come to the Finance Committee meetings. So any emails to that, you could just send it to me.
All right.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, then we'll move on to other business. Back to you, Michelle.
All right, so this is just kind of wanted to give folks a quick update on the status of our pending funding agreements. I know that we've talked about this at our last couple board meetings, but did just want to remind folks. So we have gone through the process. I think the most pressing business item of these two right now is specific to the city's funding that was committed within the 24-25 fiscal year budget. So as you all recall, we've discussed at our last couple board meetings, we, in order to kind of move those dollars at the recommendation of council from both the city's end as well as the Housing Strategies Corporation, we proceeded with some steps to adopt an updated urban renewal plan for SURA, for the SURA Urban Renewal Agency. The recommendation there being really kind of generated out of the fact that we anticipate a lot of the scope of work of the Housing Strategies Corporation is going to involve making direct grants and loans to individuals to do work at private residences. There's stipulations, as you all are aware, as to how that can operate with regards to uses of municipal funds under the state constitution. So leveraging SURA kind of as a pass-through entity enables us to make sure that we remain in compliance with those regulations, but also that the funds can be used for what the council intended them to be used for at the point that that was authorized with the budget and the incorporation of the Housing Strategies Corporation. So those have gone through all of the appropriate procedural requirements at this point, which include approval from the from SURA, from their board, as well as approval from the Planning Commission. We submitted the legislation. The final step is that the council just affirm what was presented to the Planning Commission. So that legislation was submitted several weeks back in late March. I think there was a couple questions potentially that were had in the clerk's office that I believe that we have gotten cleared up, but and so all that legislation has now been reintroduced for this upcoming vote cycle. I would anticipate that it should be on the agenda for the May 12th meeting. But we do, to the extent that there's any questions that folks have on it, or if there's additional steps that anyone would like us to take to make sure that we've done additional council outreach on it, happy to do that. We are just getting to a point where kind of time is of the essence for us to be able to move those dollars so that they can get off of the city books and into SURA's books before the end of the fiscal year deadline.
So, Commissioner, so is it a letter to the city clerk, or is it actual legislation?
It's two pieces of legislation. So the first piece of legislation is affirming the adoption of a second urban renewal plan. So that urban renewal plan just mirrors the housing strategy as it was adopted by the council and the respective ordinance back in 2024. So there's no changes to it. It's just matching what the council already approved. The second piece of legislation is asking for a waiver of the RFP process to enter into agreement with SURA for the funds that were authorized in the city budget. So once the council authorizes the dollars to go to SURA, it is stated in the resolution that SURA had already passed that they will enter into agreement with the Housing Strategies Corporation directly once the funds are in their account, and then it will be under the purview of the Housing Strategies Corporation to manage all of those dollars. So it's really truly just acting as kind of a quick intermediary, and all kind of governance and administration responsibilities will be turned over to the Housing Strategies Board.
Well, could you just send those? We're having a meeting after this, but could you just send the copies of that to?
Yep.
Okay.
Will do.
And also, I think at some point, the mayor, maybe we're going to have to make a decision, because I'm not sure what the exact extent of President Hudson's involvement is going to be in SURA, correct?
President Hudson has not been at recent SURA meetings.
So there's, so I think we're going to have to probably make or have her ask somebody to replace her on SURA if she's not be able to attend.
Yeah.
She's mentioned that to me before, and
Okay.
I'm just thinking with Councilor Caldwell
Right.
already serving as,
Yeah.
in her spot.
I think as long as we'll just make sure we look at the bylaws and make sure that we can do that, but we'd be happy to have Councilor Caldwell sit in on that.
Are you okay with that, Councilor Caldwell? Sure. President Hudson.
Just another role for you. You got it. Okay, so we'll take a look at that, but no objection.
Michelle, on that form that's in the chambers that we're going to request, what is, it's just basically the format of just that we're approving that the money can go to SIR? Is that all it is?
So you're approving that SURA, so two things, so that, and then you're additionally approving SURA to adopt a second urban renewal plan that basically facilitates it making investments in those neighborhoods. So right now, kind of the geographic limitations of SURA's work are more tied to if you have a mental map image of kind of the distressed neighborhoods that I'm sure Charles will have a visual of here in his presentation momentarily, or kind of the neighborhood revitalization strategy area. That's really the current bounds of the SURA area. So this just really kind of widens out the scope so that it's inclusive of the entire city. This is a kind of a one-time exercise. We won't need to go back to redo this as new waves of housing strategy work kind of advance in different neighborhoods. But it just kind of creates the opportunity for SURA to do that as one of its allowable investments.
I think it's important to note that while we're using SURA as the intermediary, ultimately any decisions on how that money is spent will be made by this board.
Correct, yes. None of that is changing.
Okay, all right. So we'll, council will keep, you'll share with the council what will be on the next agenda, and hopefully we can get that through and get it spent before the end of the fiscal year. Great, thank you.
Could I ask another question? Yeah, get it spent?
Get it moved
Out
off
of
of the.
city, from the city.
Oh, okay. I might spend. We know we're gonna spend it, right?
Thank you. Only other quick thing with regards to the ESD dollars at this point, everything that we're aware of from our most recent communications with them, we're still on schedule for that being at their board meeting during the month of May. So if that changes, I will keep you all apprised, but so far so good.
Michelle, before you give us this, because I know you're about to go through this, right? Okay. I just have to be very honest and transparent about one thing before because this looks good, great, that when the money gets moved over to SURA, and I know one of the things you mentioned in last meeting that you wanted to hire 4 people, I have concern, and only why I have concern is because I don't know how we're going to keep hiring. How do we keep maintaining those 4 people with the budget issues we got going on right now? And that's a big concern, not to just me, but the public has, asked those questions like, how are you creating all new jobs when we have already a situation? So I just have to put it out there that is a concern, because I don't know how we would maintain it with public dollars to continue that with the climate of the community across the country. It's not just Syracuse, across the country from private dollars. I just don't know how we would do it.
Yeah, understood. And I think that that's a conversation that can be continued kind of in collaboration with Governance Committee and Finance Committee of the Housing Strategies Corporation Board. I do think that kind of the way that we anticipate that moving through is very comparable to existing a framework for how some of the staff that are within our office, that their salaries are largely being covered from the other public authorities, so SIDA, SEDCO, same kind of comparable example. So to the extent that there is some level of annual allocation either from city dollars and or layering of other dollars, we would be looking to offset that. But I think we're kind of trying to find that balance between ensuring that we are, obviously it's extremely important that we're being good fiscal stewards of those dollars. It's also important that from a capacity standpoint that we're well positioned to be able to execute and actually move the money and have the sufficient level of staffing to be able to provide the customer service that we need to be able to. So
that's my point. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to, I just being very transparent. Like that should be like a plan that before we hire or before we figure out anything with the money, we should already have a 3-year plan. Like, okay, we know we got dollars already secured that's not out of the annual budget, because we are not going to be able to afford that. And we shouldn't be taking staffing money to pay for people when we really that money needs to go towards fixing houses or supporting that. So we need, I think, to make it make sense, for the community and even for us as a board, we got to have a plan, a 3-year plan before we execute, hire anybody, do anything. move anything until we know like where we're gonna get dollars that are not out the budget, because we know we're gonna be in a constraint for the next couple years with our dollars, right? So just, I just have to say that, that's my only concern.
Yep, understood.
Can I just ask, Kimon, about the community meetings? How well have they been attended per sector, per wave? I guess?
Sure. Kimon Jordan, Director of Housing and Neighborhood Planning. So for Salt Springs and Tip Hill and Eastwood, we actually had really strong attendance. We leverage a lot of the existing neighborhood meetings that happen in those neighborhoods to get people to attend. For Elmwood, we did have fairly low attendance, but we've been speaking to Twiggy from Jubilee Homes. She leads a national action network, and they meet every Saturday, so we'll do some collaborative planning to get some more meetings on the books. And we do understand we need to start at different places in different neighborhoods. While Salt Springs and other neighborhoods have been very involved, we understand that for Elmwood, we might need to do some more table setting.
Yeah, because Elmwood, I would say, is a tricky neighborhood because they're that in-between, between the South Side and Strathmore, and, like, they don't really mesh with either. So
Yeah.
it's more or less, where do they fit in? So getting the information to them is important.
The other thing
What about Tip Hill? That's not,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they've
Tip Hill's
been great,
involved.
yeah. The other thing I would add to that, so I think we mentioned at the last board meeting that we had just sent out mailers to all 7,000
Yes.
homeowners in the area. So we've been going through and kind of compiling all those responses of what people selected, their level of future participation and updates they want to receive. So the team's been going through and kind of identifying all the folks that have said that they want to participate in focus groups, and we're looking to get all of those scheduled. I think to the point of kind of capacity and hiring, frankly, the reason that we're slower and we're not exactly, I would have liked to have had the schedule of here's exactly what those days are for you all right now today, or preferably like 3 weeks ago. But from a staffing standpoint right now in our office, kind of being down Sarah Walton is creating kind of backfilling for us right now. So I think we're trying to find that balance, but we're aware it's we need to kind of keep moving on that, and we want to make sure that we're not codifying anything too much with regards to kind of some of the program provisions until we've had the opportunity to really complete all of that. So,
and just so you know, Brandon Johnson with TNT, he does work with the housing task force. He lives in that. Well, I think he's on that edge of Strathmore and Elmwood, so I think he would be someone that could be a connector.
yeah, Brandon's great. Awesome. Okay. I think if we want to maybe kind of probably a good segue into some of the content that Charles has, unless folks have any other questions that are immediate.
Good. All right, Charles, welcome back.
Thank you, Mayor.
Floor is yours.
Okay, so let's see. I've got some slides, some supplemental material. They're mirrors of one another. If you don't want to turn around, they'll be here. Maybe there's one or two slides that are different, but if they are, I'll call it out. Okay. But before I do that, Mayor, because really this is my last, time with you all as a corporation and as a city on this project officially, right? You're under warranty forever.
Appreciate
We'll
that.
take calls forever. But officially, this really is the handoff, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to be remiss and not make a few, sort of statements of gratitude and acknowledgement if you just suffer it for a
Please.
second. So
Yeah.
one, Mayor, thank you very much. Just you and I met maybe something between half and a dozen times over the last 18 months on this, and I want to thank you for the support and the hard questions along the way. So number one, Deputy Mayor has spent a lot of time with me on that. That's been great. It's absolutely great. Different members of the Common Council over time have been very, 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 very helpful. We had a support from a fantastic staff. Commissioner Collins has just surrounded himself, present company accepted, with really just outstanding staff. So really, honestly, from the nonprofit sector to the land bank, to the IDA and Kathy Murphy, to the city attorney's office, the Common Council, all the way through, we've had just great colleagues to work with. So
Good to hear.
I do want to acknowledge that. And then on the issue of the work, we worked, as you all may recall, with quite a fantastic steering committee. that was really led by Councilman Hogan and Council President Hudson. And I think just we confronted some very difficult issues. And really early on, I think it was actually Council President Hudson and Caitlin who recognized the linkage between a very, very sizable series of gaps to close on the housing front and the city's fiscal strength, long decades in the making, right? Yeah. And so we just were very fortunate to have that steering committee at that high level. So great. That then is, so that's sort of the quick brief history of that. I'll go through the slides now. This is, again, so you don't have to twist your necks and whatnot. Most of this should follow. So just by way of, I'm going to stay at the altitude that sets up the plans and the planning itself, really, largely because at this handoff, the execution of the plans, the granularity of it, the decision-making of it, pointing to your own impaneling of a finance committee and a governance committee, it's in your hands now. So, the authority is there. We gave the recommending framework. So at the back end of COVID, we had really tried, come in and worked for the city to do a pretty deep analysis of the housing market. And what we found that is really notable were these two sizable cost gaps. A market gap, which is to say you had real trouble competing for households with choice across the region, and that coincided with a significant difficulty for many households to afford the housing that is here in the city, almost regardless of condition. And so it ends up with a very tricky problem. On the market gap side, you've got tens of thousands of households who are really paying less than they can afford and getting a great deal. And on the other side, you've got tens of thousands of households who are paying more than they can afford and getting a terrible deal. Yeah. It is not unique to Syracuse. You will find this condition in Toledo, Milwaukee, Buffalo, Rochester. It's an endemic situation to older industrial cities. It's nothing you've done wrong. It's just this is where you are. It is the sort of what is. And this is a $1 billion problem to solve. That was a number, that we had isolated and worked very closely with members of the steering committee on. Where does that number come from? What do these gaps come from? How does it add up? And my gosh, if we can't write, billions of dollars or checks with a B, what do we do, right? So, one of the first things we did as a steering committee was to take what is a very sizable city and make it smaller. Right? And the way we made it smaller was we recognized, there was no need to second guess the excellent work in East Adams, the excellent work, for instance, on 81, the superb work downtown, the lakeshore, just the volume at the lakefront. There were a lot of areas that didn't need us to weigh in on, and so taking them off the board left us with what, and then also a number of neighborhoods that were doing so well that we could just let them, they would do well on their own. What that left were 23, what we call clusters of neighborhoods, 23 clusters that we roughly divided into asset clusters, into legacy clusters. Asset clusters really being defined by two hallmark characteristics. One was that they were vulnerable to a decline, and yet they were stable enough to make decline not a foregone conclusion, but that there were going to be some interventions necessary. And legacy clusters were clusters of neighborhoods in much softer condition, much weaker condition. Stability was really elusive, and that would be really the place to focus. And so with work of the steering committee, we've begun to narrow the clusters down and to get the size of the city just reduced a little bit. And that essentially was the work of turning the analysis into strategy, right? And then in this past 9 months or so, we've been working with 4 neighborhoods to begin building an action plan for intervention. So that came on the heels, if you will recall, Common Council had, I believe the docket was April or May of last year, had adopted the strategy that we had drafted in response to the housing study from the previous year. And in that adoption recommended 2 waves of each consisting of 2 neighborhoods, Wave 1, Salt Springs, and Tip Hill, and Wave 2, Elmwood and Eastwood. So that's just a refresher on that, just to catch everybody up. And so a big part of that was really, figuring out, you know, at billions of dollars across all of these areas, you know, with the capacity to work, you know, to intervene at a much smaller scale, you know, that necessitated, you know, figuring out where do we start. And so there was a great amount of work and logic into starting in Tip Hill, starting in Salt Springs, and then quickly following up with work in Eastwood and Elmwood, right? And in the course of that work, one of the things that we needed to do for you all as a strategy corporation was to develop some fundraising goals, right? And so those goals really amounted, you know, to about $60 to $65 million over some period of time. Could be 10, 12, 15, 20 years, depending on your scale and your capacity. But over 4 neighborhoods, we were looking at essentially the need to accomplish about 1,900 projects, right? Over 4 neighborhoods, over, you know, 10, 12, 15 years. So significant scale, right? And so we, while you have a very robust nonprofit sector, right? With some real leadership, you know, in some key areas, we felt it would be super valuable to increase the scale, and hence the recommendation to create the strategy corporation, to focus exclusively on what you might or would accurately and might call these neighborhoods in the middle, right? And so that budget really is fun. It's a good framework to think of, right? Which is, you'll see there in the circles, Tip Hill, we budget at about a $13 million, for want of a better set of words, a $13 million set of problems to solve, right? And so forth and so on, you know, until you get to that 65. And so we've pared this back, okay? We've pared it back considerably. So this represents about an 18% intervention rate on the stocks across these 4 neighborhoods, right? And there's some componentry to that. So I can come back to that if that's helpful.
Quick question.
Yeah, sure.
So, per year, how much would we would have to raise?
It would depend on how many years, council, is it council?
Caldwell.
Counselor?
No. I'm just wondering if you're supposed to say counselor, councilperson, councilman. I just don't know how it works.
Talking repeated.
Okay. It depends. The answer is it depends.
Okay.
So if I were just based on my interactions, let's just say with the Salt Springs residents, right, who were like came out in force, right, and the numbers kept growing meeting after meeting, I'd say take that number, divide it by 8 to 10 years, right? 10 years at the outside. It's a pretty robust committee, right? They're like all in. So if you take 1.5 divided by, 15 divided, so 1.5 a year is probably going to get you where you need to be in Salt Springs. If you stretched it out, right, you would have risks, but you could stretch it to 15 years without the risks outweighing the rewards, right? And then get that down to $1 million a year. So the answer is it depends.
So you're saying I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Sure.
So 1.5 million per like neighborhood, and this would be
For Salt Springs.
For Salt Springs,
Yeah.
right? So Salt Springs, right? Because every neighborhood is a little different.
Yes.
So with that being said, 1.5 million fundraised, but also would that be like a revolving? Because we're talking about this is with the fundraising, but the money that is going into
Which
houses.
you can use again.
Yeah, is this like redeveloping back? So we're doing a 2% loan, and then this money is being
Okay, so the short answer is it's up to you. The long answer is a little of both. In other words, each property is going to have a set of conditions that are going to be a little different, right? Each property is going to have neighbors that are going to be in a certain condition that are a little bit different, right? If we were in Elmwood and you are by the creek on Lafayette, you're going to have a different set of conditions than if you're over on the other side of South, right? And you're kind of going up the hill, right? So you'll just have different conditions, different properties. And the term to totally familiarize yourself is going to be the leverage ratio, right? So how much can you, as a public entity, or let me word it differently, how little can you get away with spending to get the most? That's the driving question.
So like Salt Springs,
Yeah.
the 1.5 million.
Yeah.
That's the principle you're envisioning, the capital dollars and grants and loans that need to get out the door. So hypothetically, if we need that much money to go into the neighborhood, we don't have to spend 1.5. We might go to a private bank and buy down the interest rates so that they're lending a chunk of their money and we still get to 1.5.
It's a qualified yes.
Okay.
That is your portion, okay, the public portion, right, of let's just call it total development costs, right? So total development cost minus the public portion is the private portion, right? In some cases, so we've factored in that the private portion sometimes will come from an owner, right, self-financed, and sometimes an owner who goes to a lender to obtain financing, right? But it is perfectly plausible that there will be deals where you are simply driving another party. Absolutely.
So I guess to kind of piggyback off of what Councilor Caldwell asked, is the ROI technically physical monies, or is that the incentive for greater revenue to our tax base?
The return will be in two forms. One, an imputed return that you hope becomes a calculated, a fiscal return, which is to say you will have a upgraded home on a block of upgraded homes, right, that has more stability, that will give you a higher ad valorem, a higher tax base, which even if you hold your millage constant, right, will give you more tax revenue, right, over the years. Yes.
Okay. And I just asked because
So that's
I know
your long-term return. That's your
as in
return.
from the last meeting, I wasn't there, but I did read the minutes. There was questions about the possibility of forgiveness of some.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
that's.
And I think that goes back kind of to Charles's point of like that's the prerogative of the board, right? So we've heard from many of you just in your respective capacities that the more strings that are attached to something, the less likely people are to participate. So a 2% interest rate certainly is a string. So it becomes a question of kind of what is our collective tolerance and need for that type of balance. But it's up to the board's discretion ultimately.
One other piece I'd add to that, right? So if we had this exact same conversation, literally the exact same conversation in the fall of 2020, right? We're talking about mortgage rates, right? So prime plus is at 3.25, right? And so your capacity, this exact same conversation, to really offer a loan product is not especially enticing when mortgage rates are so low. But today in this market, right, and with no sort of, it's hard to see rates changing in the next 2 quarters in any appreciable way, right? Your capacity to offer below market rate financing could translate into significant monthly savings, right? And then you become actually quite a broker of neighborhood change. So I actually think in some weird way, the higher the rates go, the stronger you are as a negotiating partner, you know, at least for households capable of borrowing. And that's certainly going to be the case, right?
But if we I'm just trying to understand, sorry, I asked a lot of questions because I had to like figure this, like break it down. So we provide these services that is much needed in our community. And then the houses, they get a loan, right? Say they get a loan, but then we raise their taxes. So they're getting a loan and then their taxes go. How is that going to be a better situation for the community? Because now they're getting hit twice. And everyone, typically we know where our medium is of people's income. So part of fixing this is to help bring our revenue of our houses up. We know that is one of the goals, right? Which needs to happen. I'm not doubting that. But then if we're doing that and we're doing that, I don't know how you sell that to a person. Like, you know, honestly, let's, you know.
Sure.
We're fortunate in Syracuse to have some really good tax abatement programs for people that are making significant improvements to their home. So whatever they're assessed at now, it'll freeze that way for 7 years, and then the increase will be phased in over a period of time. So they're not going to get hit with a huge tax bill the next year.
I think there's also a lot of other things that we're looking at as kind of immediate pairing. So there's a lot of work that Kimon and her team have been doing in conjunction with some of the work of the foreclosure prevention outreach of ensuring that we're able to kind of put mechanisms in place to sort of pair folks who might be interested in programming but maybe don't have an estate plan in place, making sure that that sort of thing can become a requirement so that we ensure that kind of the investment in the home becomes something that can be both a ensures kind of economic opportunity for family over the generations, but also helps us kind of get to the same long-term goal of improving the overall fiscal condition of the city at large.
This program here, and this is just because I, been really into housing a lot lately and asked a lot of questions. So what's the difference from the program we're offering here than the program that home headquarters offer? Is it because we're gonna reach out to far more people? Or what is the difference? I'm just trying to figure it out.
The shortest answer to that question is that we're removing the income limitation. So the majority of home headquarters programming, and Karen is certainly welcome to speak to this as well, but largely, particularly for any funds that are coming through the city or many of their other sources are limited to folks under 80% of area median income. We know we have a lot of homeowners, particularly in the middle neighborhoods, where they make just a little bit too much to qualify for that, but not enough that they're going to have any kind of incentive or capacity to be doing this work by themselves.
It's
So,
based on the funding source. It's
Right.
not written into our bylaws that
Yes.
we have to
Yeah.
loan or,
and again, I think that that's where this comes back to the reason and the necessity for investment of the city's own dollars. I think even as rubber is kind of hitting the road with some of the ESD dollars, and we're working through kind of what is the easiest means for them to be able to kind of move the dollars within their individual board processes. I think that's where the city has kind of a value add of we have more control over our own resources, though there is still limits. It's significantly above and beyond what we have if we're relying on something from HUD or from the state or any other funding source.
And that's also assuming we are offering a similar loan product to home headquarters. Again, it's ultimately up to us to decide what gap are we trying to fill? And it may be that we decide that we don't want to be in the lending business. I suspect we will to some extent, but we're better off giving, whether it be grants or making public improvements, or again, I think we want to, the purpose of generating these funds is to be able to to fill a gap that isn't currently being filled in the market by any of our other
and I know
partners.
I'm late to the game, but I thought this was going to be like a development for developers fund.
Yes, there's also components of
Do
this
that
where we
too.
want to facilitate for folks that might be doing development.
You just mentioned public improvements. That's kind of part of the concept too, is that we might be doing things in the right of way, or?
Yes, and I would say by we, I think compartmentalization under the umbrella of the city. Obviously, the city has significantly more capacity from a bonding standpoint in terms of what's allowed within the right of way. So in terms of kind of maximizing the utility of dollars, I think that's where we kind of see that sitting, but certainly tight coordination from all the same parties of me, Kimon, the rest of the team, and the respective infrastructure departments.
Michelle, don't we already control? So right now, we're changing the rules to make it fit for this anyway, through CERC, right? So we didn't have.
But that only applies to our own general fund dollars, so it necessitates kind of the dollar,
That's all we got now, anyway.
There's the ESD money.
ESD money, but.
So we got $5 million in state money that the governor granted us, and we have the $2.5 million from the current fiscal
But
year.
even from kind of like a reimbursement flow standpoint, there is still kind of a lot more rules and stipulations. There is virtually no programming that exists within other umbrellas of the state, kind of the typical programs that you would have through homes and community renewal that really allow us at scale to be able to make incentive opportunities to homeowners who are anywhere at middle or above middle income.
That's what ESD allows. Is that what you're saying?
For the purposes of this funding, they are going to allow us to do it in an income non-restricted manner, but there are certainly other restrictions that they're going to have around disbursements, the amount of paperwork and things that have to be submitted before they will reimburse us for that. So
So that's a reimbursement grant. We don't have. that.
what they're presenting to us at this point is tranches. So
What is
kind
that? I'm sorry,
of
honey.
like kind
They'll
of three
chunk it up.
tranches.
They'll give us
So
a certain amount, we spend it.
we submit all of our receipts, they give us the next amount, but we're not allowed to use it for personnel costs to administer any of the work. So that's where kind of the more that we're relying on other sources outside of our own city dollars, the more strings that we're likely to have to navigate attached with them.
So we actually have to get the 2.5 because we have nothing, because we can't get anything started because this is sort of reimbursement.
Yes, that's what I think what we've been kind of trying to communicate the last couple meetings here. So it's really critical funding.
All right, want to keep
All right,
powering
go ahead.
through? Thank you.
Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
all
Sorry.
really good questions.
I got, I'm sorry, I might have to interrupt you again, but I just want to make sure I understand.
No, as my wife says, I'm here to be interrupted. That's it. But I do want to acknowledge an earlier question, Counselor, which is, if the, which Caitlin answered, but I still think I also think it's an important question, which is, there are cases where as the improvements go up, the taxable value goes up, and the tax bill eventually does go up, right? And so it goes to, I think, A, just how complicated this is, just how hard it is, and B, ultimately the task of this group right here is to take recommendations from your staff on each deal and scrutinize each one of those projects, right, through that lens of, okay, what happens, right? What happens to the tax base? Does this move the block the way we want them to move the block? Are we actually improving the city's fiscal position with this deal, right? And are we obtaining that victory, right, at the expense of a household that can't, do that? You should be asking those questions. I think for anybody who learned to drive a car with a clutch, right, and you're on a hill, right? It's like, it's a little gas and a little clutch and a little gas and a little clutch. It's very retail work, right, to get this right, and what this corporation must absolutely do is have a dialed in, focused board, right, to evaluate each of these projects going forward. Absolutely. I think it was a really good question. Just going with this, right? So there was also this question, how does this, I'm going to maybe torture it or modify it a little bit, but how does this differentiate itself, from existing and other concurrent efforts, right? So, you want as a city to have all kinds of tools. You have, an exquisitely dialed in land bank, right? And so you would be hard pressed to thrive as a city without the land bank under Caitlin's leadership, right? You want to have that tool. You want redevelopment tools. You want the eventual grant-making and loan-making capacity of a highly flexible, non-income restricted entity like the Strategy Corporation. And the way to make it fire on all cylinders, right, is to ensure that the funds are flexible, right, and that they align with capital improvement prioritization and your broad long-term strategy and land use plan for the city. All that has to be dialed in together. The second differentiator here really is how you might, if I may be so bold as to suggest, how you all might in the rearview mirror decide, have you been doing a good job 5 years from now when you look back, right? And the metric to hold yourself to is the whole block, right? And so we are the strategies that are contained in the 4 plans move away from properties that are one-offs, right? Or even 1 or 2 or 3 properties, 4 or 5 or 6 blocks from one another, to a strategic, highly energized focus to make sure we get 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 projects on a block, and that next block has 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 projects, right? And we get a constellation of, as often as possible, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks together, right? And so it's in that, by doing that if we go way back to an earlier slide, right? So let's just grab Tip Hill, for instance, right? I'm estimating Tip Hill's going to need about 3 dozen projects a year for, a decade, right? If you don't have those in the right locations, you'd have to do twice that number of projects to get the same market impact, right? So really concentrating the effort matters. So the 2 big differentiators is non-income restriction, and the second is all hands on deck for in a very focused geography, right? So you are really paying attention to very specific geographies. You're going to try to get not just a property right, but a half dozen properties on a block to tip that block in the right direction, and as close to a half dozen contiguous blocks as possible, right? So it's a lot of curation.
Yeah, and I would underscore
just-
too, oh,
Sorry.
sorry, just really quick. So I would underscore too that to the extent that understanding that geographic concentration is a big kind of name of the game, to the extent that there are folks that are already income qualified for existing programs, we would look to prioritize routing people through all of those resources. So I think we really see kind of leveraging, like, those tools for the job already exist. We want to continue to leverage that, and then we want to kind of be in a position to take these additional resources and apply them for use cases that we are not able to currently with existing funds.
So, from my readings with the small subcluster stuff, a lot of that had to deal with the land bank and them having land that they would be, or I don't know if it's also the city as well, but it kind of mentioned like slowing down some of the sales with the land bank so that we could eventually get to these larger subclusters. But just in my own experience, a lot of the larger areas of vacant land per se, or even properties that would be demoed for something like that, is not in any of these.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so I think that that's kind of the idea. So it's a combination of places where we are less likely to get land bank ownership, as well as places where people tend to be just over that bubble and not qualifying for some of the existing 80% AMI limitations. So I think they kind of come hand in hand. I think all of these, actually, I think all 4 of these neighborhoods are ones where, for some of our existing, first project I ever worked on with the city was identifying locations for targeted neighborhoods for our zombie grant, and places that had been kind of hardest hit by the foreclosure crisis. That's all of these neighborhoods. And so there's a slightly different kind of position that they're working with there. And I think that that's what we're trying to accomplish with this, is we acknowledge that left up to their own devices, they're not in a position right now where they have the capacity to kind of take the next step and really be, I think, in the strongest position that they could be. But they are in a slightly better position than where we are typically already working through land bank home headquarters kind of most aggressively.
Well, with the ESD grant, Caitlin, could you apply for it?
It was a special, it was
only for municipalities?
it was a request that I made to the governor that she
Also, it was a
granted
request
specifically
from-
to Syracuse.
So like land bank, home headquarters, like none of the other?
You can't have it, it's all
Okay.
ours. Yeah, no,
I'm
it's,
just curious, like I was trying to figure out, I never heard about the ESD grant, so I was just trying to figure out what grant this was.
right, yeah, so we made as we often do, we made a request to the governor's office. They made the allocation, then ultimately determined that we went back and forth about Empire State Development versus HCR, but ultimately we decided to go through Empire State Development. But it is unique in that way.
I would add, Councilor Jones, like, for instance, it'll be so imperative for you as a board to be super flexible, right? So one reason that, when we put the neighborhood plans together, we really tried to stay at an altitude that gave you maneuvering room as a board, right? Was because of changing conditions on the ground, right? So one of the obvious ones is interest rates. But another one, for instance, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't looked at a land bank map in some time. Clyde, do you have any properties on Clyde or, on May or, right off Colvin? I mean,
1 or 2, yeah.
there's 1 or 2, right? So we don't know. We just can't know. 8 months from now, there could be, three properties pop up right off Colvin, right? And whatever we saw for that side of South, in Elmwood, right, might have changed, right? So it's perfectly reasonable for us to think, okay, we're operating on Lafayette, and then suddenly properties pop up on Colvin. Now you all as a board actually may have to pivot and make a change, right? You want that flexibility. You want to be able to pivot as necessary as possible. If a developer, for instance, came in and said, I've got 2 of the lots and they happen to be next to your land bank properties, can we get all 4, right? Well, conventional financing may not be there for that, but you all could be in a position to flex quickly, right? Flex quickly, demolish 2, now I've got 4 parcels, replat them and come in and infill with 8, right? Or what have you. I think you want that flexibility and the ability to move quickly, right? So that's what we tried to do. I should say that in our 5 meetings with residents from the neighborhoods, you know, it was, as Kimon mentioned, it was regrettably a bit light in Elmwood, right? But across the board, I left pretty optimistic, pretty enthusiastic, actually. What I heard time and again, and I think both it was very loud, maybe because it was wave 1, but it was the energy at Tip Hill and Salt Springs was very much to Michelle's earlier point, which was we've got a lot of households that have they're just above an income line, right? And there's a lot of appetite to upgrade that home and not really a ready partner, right? And your capacity to partner, right, and move forward a large number of pivotal blocks is pretty significant. So we were pretty heartened by that. The feedback we got from resident leaders across the board was significant. So those drafts are, the draft watermark is going to come off. You'll get the finals in the next week, maybe half week, maybe 10 days, but you'll get those, okay? We'll deliver those to you all. Those will be guiding documents for each of the 4 neighborhoods. And then I probably would say one last piece on how to proceed. If we go back to again, these are our preliminary targets, right? So it's a lot to raise, okay? A lot to aim for, okay? One of the things you'll want to be, this is sort of unsolicited advice, okay? Is you have to come out of the gate with projects that are going to succeed. Okay? You cannot afford a project that does not succeed out of the gate. Okay? So, right? So you got to have successes, right? Nothing is going to market, your second round like the first round. Get the first round right. Okay? Right? Number 2 is while Tip Hill and Salt Springs are your first 2 horses out of the chute, okay? If something comes up, you can buy a piece of property in Elmwood or Eastwood, right? Or you can start resident organizing in Elmwood or Eastwood, right? Be ready to do it, okay? Don't, welcome the surprise of residents that you didn't anticipate, ready to go, okay? And so be thinking about that sort of clutch and gas, which is, okay, let's suppose an unexpected series of requests for $300,000 in Eastwood arises, right? Don't ignore it just because you're tending to front load Salt Springs and Tip Hill. Think about it, right? And so as a group, think of this as a portfolio, right? Of decisions you have to make on a quarterly basis, right? To curate the flow of a finite amount of money to get the highest impact on the city's fiscal situation, right? That's your job, right? And I think if you do that, given all that I know about the resident leaders I met, the quality of the commissioners in the city, the material and the budgeting advice that we've given, and then the sub-area planning that we're conveying to each of the 4 neighbors, I think you'll be in great shape.
Let me ask this one question, as far as each, Kimon's gone, but as far as each quadrant.
You mean each of the 4?
Or wave, whatever, I don't know what
Yeah,
you call them.
okay, sure.
Is with the resident groups.
Yeah.
In what waves did you find that there were more homeowner residents versus investors?
I think what we saw definitely in Salt Springs, it's largely homeowners, owner occupants. I think in Tip Hill, we've had a solid mix, which I would say is really reflective of what the market is up there. In Elmwood, I think we also had a mix of both homeowners and owner occupants, albeit a much smaller, just based on kind of distinct participants. I'd say we probably had about 20 distinct individuals over the series of meetings that we've had from Elmwood, compared to in Salt Springs closer to like 65 over just this session, because we kept getting new people that would pop up here and there, which is great. So I think that it's varied, but it's been varying based on what I would expect given neighborhood kind of occupancy composition.
So you said Tip
can I add
Hill
something to that?
and, you said Tip Hill and Elmwood had more of a mixture of.
Yes.
the- okay.
Yeah, and in terms of kind of additional targeted outreach, we are planning to do some very dedicated rental property focus groups. We've had a good response rate from people that are either exclusively rental property owners, or a combination of they live in the neighborhoods themselves and then also own properties throughout. And that is a demographic group that we want to make sure that I have a laundry list of questions for those folks.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to,
Yeah.
like the individuals who live in their
Yep.
community and have invested
Yep,
in their
exactly,
community.
yeah.
The slide you had with the table there, I don't see that here. Do we have that in our materials somewhere? Okay.
Yeah,
You can send that to me.
it is, I did that slide last night. I sent it to the printer yesterday morning, so I didn't get it, sorry.
If you could email that to us, I
Absolutely.
think it's super helpful.
Yeah, agreed. And so
I like to share it with the council.
there are hidden cells on that particular slide, which I regret now, because what I'd like to be able to show you goes to, Counselors, your question earlier, which is this sort of investor, homeowner, for instance. In Tip Hill, you've got so many doubles, right? And you have actually a fair number of threes, right? That of necessity, you were bound at these meetings to run into owners of twos, right? Whereas in Salt Springs, there just there isn't the number of twos, right? And so so much will depend as this project unfolds. If you're in Eastwood, right, and you're on the 100 block off of James, right, on either side, you're going to have a much higher probability of getting owners of a 6, a 4, right? You get to the 200 and 300 block, they're all single family detached, right? There's an occasional 2, but pretty much they're 1s, right? And so, but if you're on the Strathmore side of South, you're going to have 6s, right? You're going to have all kinds of 4s and 6s in there, right? Particularly on, for instance, Clyde or around the park, right? So much depends, and you should anticipate that. Like the form that's there is going to tell you who's going to show up.
Yeah.
So, I have Michelle's, since we're meeting at 3, do you have like a budget analysis of what it's gonna be for like the first year? You can send it to us. So we can-
I have some estimates that Charles has kind of put together of how we anticipate pacing to work. And I think to some degree, like the firm numbers are a little bit of a function of just specific timing of kind of actually getting ESD tranche dollars, exactly all final terms that we end up getting from them on that. Like I said, we have an estimate of what we expect it to be, but some of that's going to vary based on all those different specifics. But it goes back to the idea of kind of we can work to the capacity of our balance sheet, and if our balance sheet is smaller, that means we have significantly smaller capacity and we make progress on this at a much slower rate.
Yeah, just so that the council could understand the process, because I know I'm just sort of getting this after several meetings, because originally we thought it was a standalone, right? We were told that this was gonna not be out of public dollars, it was gonna stand alone. So now it sort of changes. So we're gonna have to, part of every year, it's gonna have to be, money gonna have to be put into it, right? So how much is it gonna be put in and how much is staff, just so that everyone understands, like, okay, yes, it's gonna be like a 5-year project. And the first year is gonna be $400,000 in staffing.
Yeah.
But the goal is, right, because, so that they have to understand that.
Yeah, and so I have kind of the breakout of what we expect from if we were to resource this as appropriately as we think that we probably need to, what that would look like on an annual basis compared to kind of staffing versus activities. I do want to reiterate, and I know this came up at the MBD budget hearing a couple weeks ago, the recommendation that was in the housing strategy, both in the draft version that was presented to council that was voted on, and in the final version, made a recommendation that the city consider allocating $2 million annually to support the work of the organization. So the $2 million came from owing to the numbers Charles had up there earlier, that it was approximately a little bit over $2 million actually per year of those for those two neighborhoods. So on average, over the lifetime, 10 to 12 years for the 4 neighborhoods, that's what we think. Now, from kind of what do we think is realistic, if you think about the global scale of the city budget, Camone's team, just the work for foreclosure prevention outreach during this current phase is about $2.3 million of dollars that otherwise from taxes were not likely to go corrected if not for doing that outreach. So put in that context, I realize it's not the cleanest kind of
Said 2.3.
$2.3 million just of back taxes that were able to be put into a tax trust or were immediately paid from that work. So
I'm gonna
if,
clarify on that
if,
one.
Me too,
There's
because
probably another-
that's my,
might be
this is my
another
way of
2 million
like,
over here on this end of the
yeah,
table.
like, so,
Yeah.
I know if you ask Mike Canizaros, that's not exactly one-to-one how this works, but from a global, what we're doing to regenerate, I think that 2 million is a realistic number. Again, I think we've said all along as we were looking to, in conversation with the council about the establishment of an incorporation of the Housing Strategies Corporation, there needs to be kind of a layered approach, and city dollars should not be kind of the sole source at any given time. We should have multiple revenue streams, and we need to start building those out. But the city, I think we've been very clear throughout this entire process, understanding the fact that these middle neighborhoods are not well served. There's not an incentive right now for many folks to invest in them. The city has to kind of put our own skin in the game in order to advance this work.
No, I never questioned that, Michelle, by no means. I believe I've been pushing South Springs. You forgot I rejected this in the beginning, right?
Oh, no, I didn't forget.
we
No,
remember.
no, we know.
So it never was I against it. I know how important. I grew up in that neighborhood. I'm still helping people out daily, right? So I get it. I just want to, I'm just thinking of the future, and I'm just thinking of just like with myself, with my budget, right? I have to have a plan. And, $2 million every year on what we think without a major plan is really hard for us as a Syracuse community, because we, without saying a lot, we just got to make it make sense, and make sure that we're using the money to the best of our ability. Because what the analysis you gave us is phenomenal. I think it's even more, because just looking at some of the houses and walking and dealing with, I think each house is going to be in that South Springs area alone is going to be like 125 to 150 just to get it to where it needs to be on the outside. I'm not even talking about.
We've got a lot of zeros. There's no, you are 100% correct.
Right. So I'm just worried about, we told this community, this amazing community that where I love, that we're going to do all these great things and we're going to get it going. And we really don't have enough dollars to do 10 houses.
We have, I think, enough dollars to get started with the work, but it does speak to the need to maintain the momentum early on.
We don't have nothing yet. We got zero.
Michelle, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
No, go
Councilman.
ahead, okay.
No, I mean, we have $7 million promised, right?
Correct.
7.5.
7.5.
So, I mean, I'm just saying, how much money can we spend in the first year, you think? Suppose everything goes right, how much money do you think we can get out the door the first year?
I think it's very realistic that we could get at least 2.5 million of that. But again, there's going to be, we're dealing with tranches, working with the ESD dollars that we're going to need to be able to work out of the city funds basically and work on a reimbursement base to float kind of some of that larger 5 million. We're not allowed to use any of the ESD dollars for any additional staffing that we need to add in there. So from how we're kind of working through those logistics, this is a very critical year, I would say.
So in other words, the $2.5 million is the city money, that's the money that would go first, and then we would work on the tranches of the Empire State money.
Correct. And the 2.5 million is going to need to kind of offset a little bit of that.
They'll have to overlap.
What about the
Well,
private?
that's good if we
Yeah, and-
overlap, if we get some ESD money
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
But first, I mean, the first money would be the city money, the 2.5 that's already there.
Yes. So, and to your point about kind of additional private contributions, I think that's a component of this, and also the broader idea of the 3-year work plan of what are other contributions that we could look to get. I think that's a conversation that needs to be had around kind of, is there a role that private philanthropy can play, and what
But not even
exactly does that ask look
philanthropy,
like?
But what are the key asset organizations that we are going to be approaching?
Yeah, yeah.
Which-
And
do
again,
we-
I think
do we
that
know
that
that
goes
already?
back to, I think for the purposes of time right now, I know that there's some other meetings, and to the extent that folks have questions and want to take we want to make the best use of Charles's time that we can, but there's a short list of organizations that we have approached already and that we'll continue to approach. And very happy to continue all of those in the context of kind of Finance Committee, Governance Committee, and what does that 3-year plan look like?
Okay.
It's, I don't want to step outside of my authorization, okay? But to the extent, right, that anyone on council has any questions 6 months or 3 weeks from now or 9 months from now, to the extent that the city authorizes me to be responsive, right, or anyone on my staff, you can absolutely count on us to run numbers for you, answer questions for you, help you think things through. We want the organization to succeed. We want the interventions to succeed. And by no means are we sort of handing this off to you and then, walking away.
What else did you want to cover, Charles?
That's it.
Okay.
To be available to you, now, if you had more questions now, it was really just to give you that overview, just re-anchor everyone, on how we got here and what that framework is.
At some point, I do still want to revisit that sweat equity situation, but that could be another time.
I think we're going to have a whole governance committee just dedicated to that topic, so, yeah.
Speaking of governance committee, we have one upcoming.
May 16th at 1:30, so would love as much participation in that as possible so that we can keep all of that work moving efficiently.
Great. Any other, I know we're technically over time, but any other final questions for Charles or Michelle or anybody else? Good. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, Mayor.
I've worked with a lot of consultants and developed a lot of plans that are now collecting dust on the shelves, and I'm happy to say that I don't believe that this will be one of them, and that's a testament to you and your team. You've been great to work with, and
Thank you.
And I have no doubt that we'll continue to work with you, whether in formal or informal capacity. So thank you, and to the board, really good questions, really good conversation. Lots of work to be done, but excited for what's to come. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.